Okay, now we're going to tackle the overhead section of our analysis. Remember before we had said we're going to separate out our overhead and operating costs. Our operating costs we're going to handle directly within the enterprises themselves. Overheads are a little more complicated. There's several schools of thought on the best way to deal with them. The ranching for profit folks basically keep them separate as kind of whole ranch or whole business costs and subtract them off at the end. We're going to try to incorporate them directly into the enterprises themselves, and this worksheet is going to help us do that. So think of this worksheet as basically an inventory list for the equipment and buildings on your operation. Okay, so this example ranch, the Lugnut Ranch, has a main pickup, an old pickup and caker, a couple of stock trailers, flatbed, a couple of tractors, right? They're putting up some hay, so they have some haying equipment. What we're going to ask you to do here is just list your equipment out here. Then we're going to go over here to this current value column and just ballpark what you think that equipment is worth currently, okay? So the Lugnut Ranch is saying, okay, the main pickup I think is worth $20,000. Okay, great. Don't get bogged down on nickels and dimes here, okay? So we're just trying to get a ballpark estimate. Then what we're going to do is we're going to allocate these overheads. We're going to allocate this value out to our different enterprises, okay? So we're going to say, okay, the main pickup we've estimated to be worth $20,000. We're going to say I think probably 40% of that should go to the cow herd. We use it 40% of the time for the cows. 20% of the time we're hauling hay around, maybe hauling some equipment around for our haying business. 20% of the time we're out, delivering salt and mineral to the heifers, maybe night checking calving heifers, and 20% of the time we're working on our land business, building fence or something like that, right? So we're going to allocate all of these pieces of equipment out to the different enterprises on our operation, okay? And then the program is going to fill in these values for you, okay? So you're going to do that for your whole inventory, all your pieces of equipment on your place. Scrolling down, you're going to do the same thing for your buildings, right? The Lugnut Ranch has a shop, cabin shed, corrals. You can change these categories to fit whatever works for you. You can also right-click on these numbers here on the left side and click Insert Row if you have more that you want to put in. Then you're going to estimate the value. We're saying the shop is worth $100,000. 20% of that I think is to the cows, 50% to the haying, 25% to the heifers, 10% to the land, right? And then it's going to total that value out for each enterprise down here. Moving down, we have some kind of miscellaneous overhead costs. We got some horse expenses, professional development, association, grazing association dues, or stock growers or something like that. And then we've got some insurance premiums here too, okay? We're going to allocate them out just the same way that we did our buildings and our equipment. Keep scrolling down. Here's where we're going to handle our owner's salary and benefits, right? So we're charging ourselves, what we see as a fair wage for our labor and benefits, right? So I bet a lot of you are probably not taking a salary from the ranch, right? You pay your bills, you sell your calves, and you kind of get what's left over. I would still encourage you strongly to maybe we can all acknowledge that our labor is worth something, our time is worth something, and to put a value on your time. There's a couple reasons to do this. One is to figure out if the ranch could afford to replace you or not. What would the ranch have to pay to replace you? Another is to, some of these enterprises are going to look better than others, and to be able to fully, and fairly assess the profitability of each of these enterprises, we have to be able to somehow incorporate our time, right? We have to be able to say, well, how much time did I spend doing this? There's only so many hours in the day, and maybe because we're spending our time doing one in one enterprise means we can't spend it doing something else, right? So we're gonna include some labor. The Lug Nut Ranch has 2 labor units. Maybe it's a husband and wife. We're gonna say 1.5 of those goes to the our labor units, which we're gonna charge $25,000 a year for, and 0.5 units we're gonna say is a management salary, which is $50,000, right? So that equals 2 labor units. We're going to say $10,000 in benefits. It's going to figure that out, and for a 2-person operation, we're going to charge the ranch $82,500. Now, you can maybe, you know, put in whatever you feel is fair in these salary cells here, but we would sure encourage you to charge something to the ranch to put a value on your time. The program's going to transfer that down here, and you're going to be able to allocate your time out to these different enterprises, right? So this is where you say, okay, well, you know, 50% of my time goes to the cow herd, 20% to the hay-in, 15 to the heifers, and 15 to the land, right? If you don't do that, you're not able to really fairly analyze the profitability of each of these enterprises because you haven't put your time in there. Keep scrolling down. We have employee salary and benefits. We got what we're actually paying: wages, employee benefits, payroll taxes, contract labor, right? This is a cash cost to our operation. Maybe our owner salary and benefits are an opportunity cost, right? Maybe that's an economic cost if the ranch isn't actually cutting a check for that, but we would still encourage you to put that in. So it'll total this labor out, and then total the allocated labor to each of these enterprises. All right. So here's this next section, this next tab over, click over, it's the Dirty 5. This is where we're going to handle depreciation and repairs on our ranch, okay? So we've allocated a certain amount of value of our buildings and our equipment to each of these enterprises, right? So here's where we're going to take our depreciation and repairs. Some of these other categories we're going to handle directly within the enterprises, so you'll leave those as zeros. So let's go through the buildings real quick. Okay, so depreciation in our buildings, we're suggesting a 5% annual depreciation rate. We're letting you choose what's best for your operation. So maybe you have a little older buildings and they're not depreciating quite so much. You can put your own in here. Repairs, we're saying a 1% repair. Maybe you have some big projects coming up and you got to put a new roof on the shop and stuff like that. You can put your own. These guys are choosing 3% annual depreciation or repair bill. So it's going to total that up for you, right? Equipment here, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to suggest a 10% annual depreciation and a 3% repair bill. Like I said, maybe if you're running older equipment, you'd have a lower depreciation rate. Most likely, if you do that, you might have to raise your annual repair rate as well, though, okay? So here's your others. That's going to be 100%. It's going to run your labor through that, and you're not going to take your labor by any depreciation or repair, right? So that's just how you handle that there. This last section here is your summary tab. And it's gonna figure that annual depreciation rate for you. So here's your enterprises here on the left. We're saying, okay, well, we allocated $81,500 worth of equipment to our cow-calf business. We took that by a 13% depreciation and repair. Here's how much our cows are going to have to contribute to maintaining and eventually replacing equipment on our place, right? So we said, okay, well, I think our cows are going to have to contribute $10,600 about towards maintaining and replacing equipment on our place. We're going to do the same thing for the hay-in business, the heifers, the land, and here's your gut check number down here, right? This $41,000. We're going to say, okay, well, if we put aside $41,000 a year, is that about right towards maintaining and replacing equipment on our place? Is that about right for the whole ranch? And maybe you say that's too much, right? That we don't need that much to keep our equipment going on our place. You'd click back over here to the Dirty 5 section, that middle tab, and you'd find your equipment here, right? and say, well, maybe we're running older equipment, you know, it's definitely not depreciating that out that much. Maybe it's a 5% depreciation. And maybe our repair bill is a little higher though. Maybe it's 4%, right? So you'd click back and say, okay, here's $28,000, $29,000. Maybe that's a little closer to what it takes us to maintain our equipment on our place. Okay, so that's that gut check number. If that's too little or too much, you click back to that dirty 5 and you adjust your annual depreciation and repair. Same thing for your buildings. Okay, so here's our total ranch amount that the ranch has to pony up to maintain and eventually replace buildings on our place, right? And the buildings are a little kind of harder to visualize, you know. I mean, eventually down the road you're going to need a new, you know, a new roof on the shop. But to try to get that into an annual base and to be able to plan ahead a little bit, that's why we're trying to figure this out by an annual basis. Okay. Okay, so here's our other enterprises, right? Our horse expenses, association dues, insurance, right? We don't take those by depreciation and repair, obviously. So here's how much the ranch is having to contribute, and each of these enterprises is contributing towards those other overheads. Here's their total yearly overhead with labor taken out of there, and then remember we allocated some labor to each of these enterprises, owner and operator, labor and benefits, and then our paid contract labor and benefits. Here's where we handle that, right? So our cows are responsible for $47,000 worth of labor. Our hay-in, our heifers and land, $94,000 worth of labor the ranch is going to have to pony up, okay? So here's where we summarize all of our overhead costs. As we move forward through this and we go through our enterprises themselves, there's going to be a section in there in each of these enterprises where we can put our overhead costs that we've allocated to each of those enterprises directly in there. When you get there, this is where you come back to and say, okay, well, how much value of my equipment did I allocate to my cows? How much to my hay and business, right? How much of my buildings did I allocate to my cows? How much of my other overhead and how much labor did I allocate to my cows? I suggest doing this section first. So when you get to the summary or the overhead section in your enterprises, you can just plug these numbers directly in. No big deal if you don't get to it before you get to your enterprise analysis. But just know that you won't be able to get your final profit numbers, you know, in those enterprises if you haven't put these overhead costs in. But you'll have to manually put these in, click back into your overhead worksheet, and you'll be able to plug these numbers directly into your overhead section in your enterprises. So yeah, that's it for overhead. Cow-calf is next.